Our scripture reading this morning comes from the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verses 29 through chapter 12, verse 2. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Japheth, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is the word of God for the people of God. Let's pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for your word to us, for its inspiration, for its power. God, help us to hear it. Help us to know you. Help us to see you. And save me from me. Place me at the foot of the cross, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts will be pleasing to you. And all God's people said, the year that I was 16, I lost both of my grandfathers within 6 months of each other. It was devastating. They both taught me a great deal about life and about faith. My grandpa Carl, he passed away suddenly in the early morning hours of Christmas Day. He was gone hours before I even woke up. It was hard. And I still find myself shedding a few tears in his memory on Christmas Day each year. My response to his passing was pretty much the opposite of teenage rebellion. I wanted to spend more time with my family, to be a better person. See, his death was my very first run-in with the idea of mortality, the knowledge that I too someday would pass on. I knew life was short, and I knew I had to do something with it. So I went back to church, and I prayed, and I sang, and I poured my whole self into being a better person. And 6 months later, my grandpa Bill got sick. And before I even knew he was sick, he was in the hospital, in the ICU, in a coma. He was on life support for a week. My family lived in that hospital for a week. The chapel became my home. I prayed all the prayers I knew. I made all of the naive bargains that we try to make with God in moments of desperation. In the end, we had to turn off the life support. And as my grandfather took his final breaths, I sang On Eagle's Wings, one of his favorite hymns. When the nurses told us he was gone, I became certain of two things. God exists, and I want nothing to do with him. My short-lived anti-rebellion was over. I wanted nothing to do with the church or goodness. Life was short, and God wasn't listening, and God didn't care. So I might as well live life for myself. I might as well party with my friends and have as much fun as I can while I'm still breathing. This lasted for a little over a year. I thought I was doing good keeping my distance from God, and then somehow, before I knew it, I was invited to spend a week at a Christian camp in the middle of nowhere in the UP. Now, I was most definitely not interested in any of the God stuff. It was a friend of mine's camp, and I was told it was going to be a work week. We were going to be in the middle of nowhere, cutting trails in the woods with machetes, all sorts of things that young men in their teens like to do, building dorms for the camp, and I had it on good authority that some cute girls were going to be at the camp too. But for the most part, the most important thing to me at that point was that it was an opportunity to get away from my parents, who had grown very weary of my behavior over the last year, and I needed to get away from them just as much as they needed to get away from me. For all that, I was pretty sure I could handle the Bible thumping that I was sure was going to come. But it was at that camp that I became aware of God in a new way. There was no Bible thumping. I didn't walk the aisle and pray the sinner's prayer. But through working with people and seeing faith lived out, I knew that there was more to God, more to faith than the rote prayers and the empty rituals that I had become accustomed to. It was at that point that I began to read the Bible, to seek to understand it, to actually talk to God, not memorize words from my childhood and not in desperate bargains, but as a child speaks to a parent, seeking to understand. I spent the next several months talking with friends and with old teachers and with parents of my friends, virtually anyone who would talk about faith and about the Bible with me. I spoke with my parish priest, and I read. And I read, and I read, and I read the Bible. Finally, like John Wesley, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I knew that Christ had died for me and for my sins. I knew that God loved me and that despite the pain and the suffering of this life, God was with me always. I knew that life had a purpose, and that purpose had very little to do with the ideas I had of a high-paying career or the desires of my heart. At that camp, my eyes were opened, and I realized that life is a journey, but it's not the kind of journey that simply moves us from point A to point B. Life, our journey through it, is a very special kind of journey that requires a very special word. And the word that I like to use, the word that at least at this point in my life resonates for me, is the word quest. I like the language of quest when it comes to life and to our faith journey because it denotes movement and searching. It implies growth throughout the journey. We're not just wandering, we're on our way. My favorite books growing up and still today are about a hero on a journey. Someone who is learning and changing and discovering something new. The best stories are the ones where the hero ends the story a different person from who he or she was when they started. And the same thing happens in the Bible too. My favorite stories are the stories that show us people on a quest, on a journey, moving forward in faith, learning and changing and being changed along the way. Our scripture passage this morning points out a few of them. Hebrews 11:29 begins with an abridged list of quests undertaken by faith. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. By faith, Rahab was spared. By faith, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Japheth, David, Samuel, and all the prophets conquered kingdoms, brought justice, obtained promises, quenched fire, escaped the sword, shut the lion's mouth, made strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight, and grew in their faith and in their character along the way. Priests and prophets, prostitutes and paupers and princes did some of the most marvelous and miraculous and memorable things, all by faith. As you read the stories in Scripture that surround all of those names that we just read, you'll be reading the stories of their quests, their missions, their lessons, their faith in action. By faith, David slew Goliath. David believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and therefore stepped out in faith without armor or sword, just some rocks and a sling. But David's confrontation with Goliath was neither the beginning nor the end of his quest. Gideon is another. By faith, because he believed what God said, he reduced the size of the Israelite army to merely 300 soldiers, and with those 300 soldiers, defeated a force of thousands. Being on our quest by faith is not magic. I'm sure many of us have learned throughout our lives thus far that prayer is not a wish that our genie God grants to us. By faith means continuing on the quest, the journey, even if you have no idea where it will take you. But knowing all along that God goes with you every step of the way. What, I wonder, do you think would have happened if David had decided to wear the king's armor and take up the king's sword? Or maybe David decided just to deliver the food to his brothers and head home to tend the sheep. Or what if Gideon had ignored God's direction to winnow down the size of the army to 300 warriors? Would God have failed them? Would David have lost the battle, or Israel been conquered? It is interesting to speculate. But I have a feeling that the story would really just be a little different. I think the message would have been the same. Their quest would go on. Their prayers would be answered, just in different and surprising ways. We could spend a year full of Sundays talking about these fantastic stories of faith. The Gideons and the Jaels, the Jonahs and the Ruths and the Nehemiahs. But I don't believe that would bring us to the heart of what the author of Hebrews is trying to get across to us. Now, the mentioning of those great stories of quests of faith are there for a different purpose. Those words, those names, they're all there to lead us to chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. I'll give you a little Bible lesson here. When you're doing Bible study, one of the first things you need to pay attention to, one of the first rules, is called the therefore rule. When you're reading the Bible, if you come across the word therefore, you have to ask yourself, what is the therefore? Therefore. Therefore tells us that what comes next, what is going to be said next, is because of what came before. And this passage, like none other, is the living embodiment of that definition, because we have examples of those who have gone before us. We should be challenged, inspired, encouraged to be faithful on the quest that is ahead of us, the journeys and the challenges of our own lives, because we have seen and heard of these heroes of faith and their stories. Therefore, because of that, let us have the courage and the faith to be faithful to our own unfolding stories too. The whole of chapter 11 and the previous 10 chapters were to get us to this place, to this directive, the climax of the book of Hebrews. And before we talk about the quest, I want us to talk about and understand the great cloud. The great cloud is not where we save our information in cyberspace. Now, when we hear or read the words great cloud of witnesses in our context, we tend to think of it as someone who has seen something. See, there are witnesses in court and eyewitnesses on the 10 o'clock news, and they're there to tell us about what happened. So when we read verse 1 of chapter 12, we may think that it is telling us, since so many are gathered around us, watching what we are doing, since there are so many witnesses waiting to see whether we fly or fall, then we should feel the pressure to do our best, to run the race, set out on the quest. But I really don't think that that's what's being said here. Witness is the wrong word for us. Instead of witness, it should say and could say testimony or story. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of testimonies, stories that tell of God's faithfulness, stories that tell of the human connection to the divine, stories that tell us we can trust God in all things. Since we have all of those around us, since we are surrounded by the stories of David and Gideon and Barak and Samuel and Ruth and Rahab, since we have all those stories of God's faithfulness, we can run with courage the race that is laid at our feet. And when I talk about stories, I'm not talking about once upon a time. Really, it's not the words of those who've gone before us that inspire us. It is their lives. It's not what they had to say about God, but what their lives have to say about God that inspire us and encourage us. Because we have those stories, that testimony to the faithfulness of God, it should give us the strength to lay aside every weight and run the race. Some believe that the great cloud of witnesses are the faithful departed gathered to judge us. But friends, they are so much more than that. They are the stories of the faithful departed, gathered to strengthen us, to encourage us, to be the faithful still present. And they are the communion of the saints, the community of the faithful from all generations, a community that transcends space and time. Our family is larger than we realize, and those faithful saints are there to encourage us with their stories, with their lives, and to remind us that we never have and never will be on this journey, this quest, alone. When our son passed away, one of the things that worried me most was how Michaela was going to process it. It turns out that we had already planted the seeds without even realizing it. See, when Carl was first in the hospital, my wife pretty much had to live there with him, and I was up in Oscoda, and we were back and forth all the time. Michaela, who was 3 at the time, was very sad. And she was sad because she thought that we couldn't be a family unless we were all together under the same roof. And we taught her that we're always a family. No matter how far apart we might be, we are always a family no matter what. And that message became all the more important when Carl went on ahead of us. We are still family. Distance and death don't change the love that ties us together. All along, we have encouraged Michaela to know that Carl is still with us, still alive with Christ and in our hearts and minds. We are connected through the community of the faithful, and that will never go away. It's been 2 decades since my Grandpa Carl and my Grandpa Bill passed away. But they still live on. And the lessons they taught me and the faith that they lived before me, and in those ways that I can't quite explain when it feels like somehow they're not really gone. My Grandpa Bill taught me how to mow lawns, of all things. One of the amazing things he did on his quest of faith was he would mow the lawns of all of the widows and the infirm folks in his neighborhood. He never accepted money, not even to compensate him for the gas. But whenever he asked me to help, he always made sure to pay me for my help. Now, 20 plus years later, every time I get behind a push mower, which isn't very often these days, thanks Jeff. But every time I get behind a push mower, I hear his voice. His teaching about the right way to cut that particular yard and cautioning me about getting too close to the flower beds. But the lesson I remember most is that we need to care for our neighbors. Color, politics, gender, none of that comes into play. We take care of our neighbors. And the thing is he never said that to me. He lived that in front of me. His story inspires and informs and shapes my own. And in me, his story still goes on. And I do believe that one day we will see each other face to face. But even now, we are still connected by our faith and by our love. This great cloud of witnesses is a tremendous affirmation to us that death is not the end of the story. Love is stronger than death. And those ties that bind still go on. So on to the race. What is this race that Hebrews is talking about? What is the quest that the pastor is so excited about? What is the path that it takes? Can you show it to me on a map, Pastor? No. I'm sorry. I can't show it to you on a map. There's no app for that on your phone. There's no GPS device that will mark the way for us. But we are given a compass. the ability to make sure that we are on the right bearing, the right heading, as we look to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. We keep our eyes on Jesus and we will be on the right course. We don't know how long that course is. We don't know what obstacles will come, but as long as we are focused on Jesus, we know that we're heading in the right direction. The rest of it, the obstacles, the detours that come, they're part of the journey, the quest that we are on. And it can be used to teach us, to make us stronger and more faithful followers of Jesus Christ. I apologize for how geeky I'm about to get, but bear with me. Some of my favorite books growing up were The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. If you have not read them, you should. They have been in print since the 1950s and are fantastic. The Fellowship of the Ring, the first book of the trilogy, finds Frodo, our hero, a peaceful and gentle little hobbit who's never left his home neighborhood before, in possession of a ring that is as evil as it is powerful. Frodo meets with a council of the inhabitants of Middle-earth to discuss the ring's fate, and has decided that that ring must be destroyed. But it can only be destroyed where it was created, in the fires of Mount Doom, in the dark, evil land of Mordor. The ring, the evil that pulsates from it, is causing all of the men and the wizards and the elves and the dwarves to fight about how it should be done and whose quest it should be to carry the ring. And Frodo sees how this dangerous and terrible ring is tearing apart the people around him. And he steps up and he says, I will take the ring. I will take the ring to Mordor, though I do not know the way. That line always gets me. I will take the ring to Mordor, though I have no clue how to get there. Frodo wasn't the hero anyone expected. Nobody looked at him and saw a champion, someone who could hope to challenge the darkest power of all history. But he felt like something had to be done by someone, and he was someone. And he said, I'll do the best I can, though I do not know the way. I'll take the first step if you'll help me find the next one. That first book, The Fellowship of the Ring, is about just that. How the characters cross their different cultures and expectations to support this unlikely hero on this impossible mission. It's about the relationships they form and the challenges they face and the quest that takes them on this grand adventure. I think for me, that's what faith feels like. It's not about having all the answers or knowing where the road is going to take me or what might happen along the way. But it's about standing up in the company of the great and mighty heroes around me and saying, I don't feel important. I don't feel worthy. But I will do the best I can if you help me find the way. That's what faith looks like. That's what the church and the community of saints is all about. Joining together as we do the things we feel called and inspired to do, even when we don't have all the answers. Setting out in faith, taking the first step, and trusting that God, with the community of saints around us, will help us find the next step on our quest of faith. Amen? Let's pray.